To begin with, focus on health law. This is a presentation of the Law Office of Attorney Kenneth Haber of Maryland. On this set, Attorney Ramesh Khurana questions Attorney Haber on a perspective on the National Practitioners Data Bank and healthcare. These two attorneys will further look into Quality Improvement Acts. Let's see.
Good morning. This is Ramesh Khurana, attorney at law, and I have a great pleasure in welcoming Kenneth Haber, who is a Maryland attorney and having his office in Boyers, Maryland. I have a great pleasure in welcoming to you, sir.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, Ramesh.
Kenneth is an ex-assistant U.S. attorney, and he has a private practice in Maryland now, and he focuses on certain issues which are very dear to physicians. And we will be talking today with you regarding perspective on the National Practitioners Data Bank and Healthcare Quality Improvement Act. I think our physician community will be very much tuned to hear your views about this act.
Well, thank you, Ramesh. The National Practitioners Data Bank and the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act are interrelated. The Data Bank was a good faith of Congress, and the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act was a good faith effort on the part of Congress to try to root out doctors who don't live up to standards and that they try to hide their record. And that's what the data bank's about. The Healthcare Quality Improvement Act creates an immunity if doctors, through peer review, using certain standards, sanction one of their peers, they have immunity under the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act. It's not automatic, and it's certainly not in a fashion that there aren't limits on it. There's limits that curtail the immunity. They have to comply with certain aspects of the law, but if they do, they do receive immunity that is substantial. The adverse malpractice reports go to the data bank. Adverse peer review activities go to the data bank. Government sanctions go into the data bank, and these are available for other entities, hospital medical boards when they're deciding whether or not to give privileges to doctor, to medical plans, insurance plans, whether to accept them into the panels, and also to other licensing boards and to the government itself. All of this information is available to them in one fashion or another. The data bank is itself protected from suit, and the doctors who work in the peer review effort receive immunity if in fact that they are complying with the requirements of the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act.
Can you talk about the immunity which is available under the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act? My question to you is, what does this immunity mean for peer review?
It means that if they meet certain minimal standards, if the doctors doing this peer review meet certain minimal standards, such as trying to make a reasonable effort at finding the facts, have a reasonable belief, provide adequate notice and hearing, and come up with reasonable belief in the results of their efforts, then they're going to find that they do have immunity. So if they're sued, and it's not that they can't be sued, but if they are sued and they establish these elements, then they're going to be immune. There's not going to be a judgment taken against them. There can be also suits from the doctor's perspective for injunctive relief if he feels that they weren't in compliance, that they were wrong in their determinations. The doctor can try to get injunctive relief without damages, and he doesn't have to go against all these. It's just the damages are protected from. as far as these elements of a defense. So it's a complicated area of law, but it's an area that doctors should be aware of, especially if they're active in their hospitals or other areas where they have to do peer review, if they're doing peer review for the government, if they're doing peer review for insurance companies, if they're doing any sort of quality assurance type of work, they need to know about these things.
Interesting. Can you talk about standards? Now, what are these standards that must be adhered to for immunity to attach?
Well, they have to have a reasonable belief for their efforts and a reasonable effort to obtain the truth of the facts. And the notice they have to give is an opportunity for a person to defend against the concepts that we have in due process, the opportunity to defend against the charges, opportunity to be represented by counsel, an opportunity to have a record made, an opportunity for impartial physicians to sit as their peer. So they can certainly challenge a peer who's their competitor and say, hey, that guy is right down the street from me, and he's a primary care physician. I'm a primary care physician, and he's not impartial. So they have these type of concepts of due process, just like we do in this country, and they have a right to this type of objectivity.
Very good. Now, Ken, what happens if after following these procedures, a physician is unfortunately disciplined?
Well, that gets reported to the data bank. If it's anything as severe as a 30-day suspension, it gets reported to the data bank. The data bank will keep it forever and ever. So it's always going to be there. The only way it's removed is if the reporting entity voluntarily removes it, or if there were to be a court decision that ordered the reporting entity to voluntarily remove it, or if the data bank itself were to make a determination that the reporting entity didn't qualify, or that they didn't follow proper procedures, et cetera, et cetera. My office has been fortunate enough to have two occasions where we had adverse reports removed from the data bank. The first one, we sued the data bank, and the government, as part of its efforts to defend itself, checked into what we said and had the hospital, quote unquote, voluntarily remove it. The second time, it was a matter of correspondence with the data bank and making sure they knew who we were and that we had filed the suit earlier. And they went to the medical practice and said, give us your documentation showing that you have due process. And they didn't have due process. They just fired somebody and reported him to the data bank. And you can't do that, You got to have due process. And when the data bank realized that was the case, they weren't going to fight a losing battle. And they told the medical practice that had filed against this doctor that they had to remove it, and they did, because there's the government telling them you have to do this, and they're not going to argue with the government.
Very interesting. Now, Ken, my understanding is that some confidentiality attaches to the reports which go to the data bank. Now, can you please talk about this confidentiality part?
Yes. It's totally confidential, except that the whole world knows about it. If you're a hospital that somebody's applying to for privileges, first thing you do is give them a piece of paper that says that they're waiving their confidentiality and that they're authorizing the data bank to release to you the information that's in the data bank. If you're a third-party payer and somebody's coming to you and wanting to participate in your program, first thing you do is you give them the authorization form and they have to sign it. So there's confidentiality, but for the important people in your life, if you're a physician, there is no confidentiality. If a patient comes to you, you're going to say, go away, patient, I'm not signing anything. I don't want you as a patient. But when you really want the relationship with either the hospital or with the third-party payer, you're going to sign that, so there is no confidentiality.
Now, I would like to ask you the last question because we are running out of time for this segment. Ken, what happens to the information once it is disclosed to these entities? You talked about various institutions and various bodies.
Right, the confidentiality still attaches itself to it, but it could be shared with anyone within that organization who has any legitimate aspect of peer review. So it is confidential, but everyone and their mother can find out about it, especially in a small hospital where, you know, everyone knows what everyone's doing, you know, and certainly if the hospital doesn't enforce confidentiality, then it's not going to be enforced. If the hospital does enforce confidentiality, then of course it will be enforced. But there's many cases where, you know, this sort of information leaks out and, you know, it embarrasses the doctor. But that's just a circumstance of life in a hospital at times.
I thank you very much, Ken, for coming to our studios this morning and given a perspective about the National Practitioners Data Bank and Healthcare Quality Improvement Act. And I think the audience is going to derive a lot of benefit out of your presentation, and hopefully we will see you in the next segment after 2 weeks.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciated the opportunity to be here. And I see we have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, sure.
So we might as well make good use of it.
Yeah, sure, sure. We can talk about. Now, do you have any last word to say about the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act or this National Practitioner Data Bank?
Yes, it was a good effort on the part of Congress, but like many things, it can be abused. There is no real opportunity to correct the records there. You know, if people go through the processes of a sham peer review. You get reported, they filed the processes, and you're stuck with that. If it was the type of situation where they didn't file the processes to get the reportable event, if they didn't file it, then things can happen to help the doctor out. But if the reporting entity went through the proper procedures, then a doctor has a great deal of problems to correct that. He may have to sue the reporting entity in order to have a court make a determination that this was not correct or true, and then use that to get the reversal.
Thank you very much, Ken. I think now we are run out of time. Cameraman has already signaled our time is up. And I again thank you very much for coming to the studios.
Thank you.
Thank you.